Okay, why don't we dive in with a little bit of the setup here, and folks will trickle in before we get started. So thanks everybody for taking some time out of your busy days to join. Rob and I are excited to spend the next 30-40 minutes with y'all talking about a topic that we've been seeing a lot of interest and engagement on, and that's really this idea of companies that are historically, been focused on a product, but given, changes in their market, whether that's external factors or internal factors related to, just not getting as much value out of a purely product sale, are trying to migrate, from purely product play to something beyond that, selling services, solutions, and just, a deeper, broader value proposition to their customers. And that's attractive for a lot of reasons that we'll get into. It's also challenging, for a lot of reasons. So, Rob and I are hoping to share some of our experience on that, challenge today, and hopefully get some questions and engagement, from you all. With that, I guess just a couple other setup things. So just so Rob and I are both with a firm called Innosight. We've been around for about 25 years, focused on growth strategy and innovation, really helping companies in disruptive situations, trying to drive new and different things into the market. And obviously, the shift from products to solutions is very much representative of that type of challenge. Rob and I both have broad industry experience, although we spent a lot of time with industrial B2B organizations. So we'll talk about some of those examples, but recognizing this may be a more diverse audience, we're happy to, dive into other industries and situations as well.
Yeah, I think we see this increasingly across the landscape in industrial. And, another place where I think the product to solution switch is become almost something that companies have to deal with is medtech.
Yeah, absolutely. The only things I'll say on housekeeping, so we are going to record this. We'll share the recording and all the materials, after the session. We've muted, all the lines just to sort of keep the conversation focused, but encourage a lot of engagement. We're very happy to entertain, questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to use the chat function or the QA function. We'll be monitoring those and, picking up those threads as we go. So with that, why don't we, dive in, and we'll stick a link in the chat here to an article that Rob recently and I wrote on this topic, and we started that article with a case study of deer. And I think it's interesting. Ag is probably one of the oldest industries out there, but in a lot of ways, they're forward leaning in a lot of different areas. And Deere is being a leader in the market is certainly one of those. And I think their experience and the progress they've made, sort of really encapsulate both the challenges and some of the best practices. So maybe we start just to bring this sort of challenge to life. Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what's going on at Deere and the transition that the journey that they're on from products to solutions?
Yeah, thanks, Ned. I mean, I feel this is one of the best examples out there of a firm that has been able to make this transition. Now, I don't want to say that they've completely transitioned, but they've been able to build a really transformational solution business that operates in concert with their core, hard iron business of selling, classic tractors, harvesters, et cetera. And so I think their journey has a lot to teach us about some of the opportunities and some of the pitfalls that industrials encounter as they try to make this transition. It also gives an opportunity to, set a kind of a realistic set of expectations about how hard this is, about how long this takes, and has along the way some examples of best practices that you could follow to crack the back of some of the really hard problems. You know, and just to elaborate a little bit, I have some personal experience here because I was involved with this, not at its very inception, but at a critical turning point where a lot of the ambition that and approach, you know, was set for this strategy. And really, that was, you know, that was basically a decade ago. And that wasn't when they had first thought of the idea. So they were already working on this. So this is something, this has really been, you know, they're well into the second decade, you know, of this transformation. And I think, you know, important to note that a couple of things that they established a decade ago were, you know, real conviction and alignment among their senior leadership about the need to get this done. So it wasn't just something to think about, it was something that needed to happen. And then I think that the other thing that they understood was we're going to have to do things really, really differently in order to make this successful. And so we have to be open to it. And they're a company with very, very strong, you know, culture, rules, operating norms, et cetera, built around that, you know, big iron business. So this for them was a major departure and created a lot of friction along the way, but also enabled them to actually, you know, have success, you know, on this journey. So some of the things that we'll hit on as we proceed into this discussion, you know, there are great examples at Deere of them doing that. So you know, we're going to talk in a little bit about innovation pathways. We're going to talk about, you know, selling playbooks. We're going to talk about the idea of a value management approach that needs to be built into the company. Those are all things that were part of, you know, Deere's experience over the last decade.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll come back to, you know, that sort of 2 decade, journey. I think that sort of, suggests a degree of challenge and change associated with really, you know, making this shift from, you know, products to solutions. But before we dive into, some thoughts on how you actually make that transition and some of the things that, you know, we've seen and worked with clients on to effectively navigate that transition. You know, Rob, I'm curious your sense. I mean, Deere's a great example, Ag's a great example, but you sort of alluded to in the beginning, this is not isolated to, you know, kind of one or two industries. We're seeing the imperative, you know, around this challenge really, you know, across, you know, kind of sectors. And I'd be curious your sense of what are some of the things that are, you know, driving that.
Right. Well, I'll give you two sort of I think iconic instances in which companies reach for solutions as an answer. One is you're bringing a really radical innovation into the market, radical or transformative innovation, disruptive innovation into the market, but customers don't know how to engage with that innovation. There are barriers that prevent them from immediately utilizing it. It doesn't fit with their operating model or, you know, something along those lines. That forces you, the innovator, to then engage at a next level of depth with the customer and begin to create a solution around removing those barriers so that your customer can access the value that you're bringing into the marketplace. So you wanted to sell, maybe you wanted to sell a product, but when it came down to it, you realized, okay, no, I've got to wrap something around this that's different, software, services, what have you. A second iconic, I think, instance is the product that has been the centerpiece of your core business for years is beginning to be commoditized. And you don't have an easy technical innovation response to that pressure. You know, you're seeing the ROI on innovation get pressured downward, inflection. You're seeing an inflection point in your ability to you know, drive margin out of you know, new innovations. So one of the things that you're going to do in that instance is you're going to look more broadly at the customer, at the jobs to be done that your customer has, and you're going to look to try to solve those jobs. And that's going to then put you in a position where, you know, your product is part of this, but it's information that you have or expertise that you have or ancillary pieces of the puzzle that would allow you to drive different sources of value at the customer. And then you've got to create a business model to make that work. I'll throw one more thing out there. You know, the massive increase in the power of digital solutions, and of course, AI being the most recent and revolutionary of those things, um, is creating a situation now where data obviously becomes a really important aspect of every value chain. There's a data value chain that's bolted on to the traditional physical value chain that has always existed. And there's a question for every firm: how do I participate in that part, that new part of this value chain? Because this is a subset really of the commoditization problem. If I can't participate in it, then my thing that I make is ultimately going to be
Yeah.
less valuable
Yeah.
in the overall equation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to bring that up as well. I mean, it almost feels like it's not a choice anymore for many industries. You have to engage with this if you want to remain relevant. I guess maybe last thing I'd be curious your sense of, Rob. So Deere, 2 decades working on it. I think you could argue that they were prescient and had some really good foresight to understand this transition and be kind of a leader against this. Given the ubiquity of digital and data and all that sort of stuff in many industries, where's the conversation at on leadership teams? Is there sort of more recognition that this is an opportunity, we've got to be doing this, and really we're at a point where the challenge is how do we make that transition? Or do you still see folks struggling with to your point, Deere, they sort of committed, they said, hey, we have to do this. Do you still see companies sort of trying to figure out whether this shift from products to solutions is relevant, in their industry for them as a company at this point in time?
It varies tremendously sector to sector,
Mm,
within the industrial world. But I think, so for example, in agriculture, the discussion is over, right? Because Deere ended it, and now
right.
everybody is trying to catch up, right, and create their own version of this.
Yeah.
I would say that in other places, that there is a lot less conviction about this, and there are a lot of people down inside firms who are trying to foment a revolution from within, or
Yeah. Yeah.
or create something compelling that forces the conversation. But I think there are a lot of leadership teams that still don't really know how to think about this.
Yeah. 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 My sense is there are a lot of organizations where there's an aspiration, or people get excited about the possibility of solutions for higher margin and deeper relationships with customers and all that, but you know translating that into a specific strategy and a plan to get there, and actually making progress on that, I think that's where you see a much more mixed bag.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I guess against that, let's dive into maybe sharing some perspectives on how we're thinking about this and some of the things that we've seen that are helpful to companies. And yeah, we won't sort of fully unpack this, and the article goes kind of deeper into it. But I think our sort of frame on this is one of the reasons this is a challenge is it's sort of a system, kind of, problem. It's not just you turn, one knob and all of a sudden you've got, solutions, but you really need to think about, across your entire, sort of value chain, value stream, the things that you need to evolve and change to be able to identify the opportunities, develop them, capture the value, from that. And that really requires, sort of a broader sort of shift to a solutions mindset across the organization. So, what we've got here is, I think, a representation of sort of, that shift and some of the core elements. We'll dig into each of these, Rob, but I wonder if you can give, folks a little bit of a flyover of sort of the pieces and how they relate to one another.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of ways you can represent this, but I think this captures some of the really fundamental distinctions between a solutions business model and a product centric business model. And one of the key things to realize is that all of these things, in a product business, you design it, you build it, you sell it, you deliver it. Maybe you have some responsibility for installing or maintaining it, but basically it's a sequential process. Whereas a solutions model is everything is operating in parallel, simultaneously. And of course there should be learning loops in a product business as well, but here they're absolutely essential and ongoing to how you conduct this business. And so, for example, to build a solution is actually to deliver it, right? And so if we look at these 3 points, we've got customer-focused solution design on the top. That's all about, a absolutely different level of depth in understanding your customer than what is required, to sell a product. The best product companies in the world really understand how their customers use their product. But you have to go beyond that to sell a solution. You have to look through your customer and sit in their place and understand what is their strategy and what are they trying to accomplish more broadly, in order to be able to create value for them. The bottom right corner is about selling. And there is a ton of failure in the solutions world around the ability to sell a solution. And there's a whole bunch of, detail in there that we'll unpack a little bit later in the conversation. But the essential difference is that you're selling value. You're not selling products and features. You're not selling benefits. You're selling value. And that is a very different function for your selling organization to perform. And then the bottom left is maybe the slipperiest and trickiest of all to think about, which is that, as I said, with a product, you might just, you might ship it and you might ship it to your customer. You might be involved in installing it. You might be involved in maintaining it. Here, delivery is ongoing. And it is intertwined intimately with the customer at all times. And there's a function around assuring that the value that you promised over in that selling process is actually being delivered, and that your customer, because it's not really truly delivered until your customer is able to realize it. And so you have to be able to recognize where are there barriers, where are there additional opportunities for value. It's a constant process of engaging with that value, shaping it, and enabling customers to realize it.
Yeah, that's great. So each one of those is represents a pretty big shift. So maybe why don't we dive into each of those three and unpack them a little bit. Perhaps starting with the top, which is really the sort of how do you come up with innovations. I'd be curious, Rob, how you would describe sort of some of the big differences between a traditional sort of stage gate product focused innovation, process from a more solutions focused one. And there's an interesting, question in the chat, around, if you're sort of in a commoditized, market and you're selling to, procurement and it's sort of lowest bid, you're sort of in that, mode. How do you get beyond that, and really get some deeper insights into where there may be, broader innovation opportunities that you can pull into that, process. So maybe you want to talk a little bit to that. I know you've got thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, and I want you to hear your thoughts on that topic as well, Ned. But because I think that's also part of the selling challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Procurement is to solutions design and selling and delivery. What sunlight is to vampires, right? It's like I should flip that around so that it's something good and something bad, but they are really antithetical. Like if you're dealing with procurement exclusively, that's a recipe for failure in the realm of solutions. Procurement is an intermediary who's been tasked with buying the same thing from you they always bought, but forcing you to make it a little better for a little bit less money year in and year out. It's a rare company that has tasked its procurement group to solve the kinds of problems that you're likely going to be trying to solve with your solution. So you need to get outside procurement. You need to find the person in the organization who actually owns the problem that you intend to help them solve. And it's rarely the person who's buying from you the thing that you sell today. It might be. And if so, that's good. That's going to save you a lot of trouble. But it's often somebody who's 1 or 2 levels above that person, and certainly not in procurement. So you need conversations happening during the innovation process and the selling process and the delivery process that get you well clear of the
Hmm.
procurement function.
Hmm. Right. So you've got to be, talking to a broader group of potential stakeholders or customers, maybe higher up in the organization because they have a sort of broader purview. The other thing that I think you alluded to, earlier is the importance of kind of, deep customer understanding and really, trying to understand more fundamentally what the, company is doing. We often use this shorthand of, a jobs to be done because, for solutions, they're not asking for, kind of a widget. They're asking, for some sort of, problem. And so you need to shift your, market insight, questions, along those lines.
Absolutely. To go back to the original question, then, how's the actual innovation process different, and
Yeah.
why does it need to be different? I think it's easy for us to get our hands around the fact that this is that a solution is more complex and has many more sort of types of ambiguity associated with it than a typical technical product development process has. Because
Yeah.
there's typically a product inside the solution as well. So you've got all that technical complexity, but
Yeah.
now you've got other layers built around that. So what that, the implication for that from a process standpoint is you can't push a solution through a stage gate. And what you often see is companies will either try to do that, or they'll just set a team off, a task force, or they'll set them up and have them operating in open space, trying to do things around business model innovation, but without structure or tools, to help them do that, and to help them to, identify the critical assumptions, to drive uncertainty in a really systematic way out of the development process. And so that's where they get into trouble. You often find those teams swirling. You'll get into, you'll talk to a client, you go, oh yeah, we have a team that's working on that, or oh yeah, we got that. And then you talk to the team, they're like, yeah, we've been doing this for 3 years, and we
Right.
can't actually figure out whether anybody's going to pay for this or not. And what you don't find is the rigor of thinking that is forced by a process, but it's a different process. And so
Right.
there's a need to create, which is the article mentions, a pathway that is distinctive and built for purpose to help them to get this done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty common failure mode of trying to, do sort of the business model innovation of, required for a solutions thinking, but, grind that through a process that's, really not fit for purpose, to do that. Okay, that's great. So maybe just to hit on a couple of these other ones. So if we shift to the selling mode. So, great. Let's assume that you've got, the insights. Let's assume that you've come up with compelling ideas and sort of tested them, and now you're ready to figure out how do we bring them to market? How do we, kind of effectively, scale them? Selling a solution, is pretty, pretty darn different than, selling a, product. Maybe talk to us about, again, some of those, differences and how you need to change your sales organization and your even approach to selling to, address that.
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of these things earlier. I mean, this is where the procurement thing really comes in.
Yep.
Often you almost have to create a buying process, right? Your customer might not have a buying process for the thing that you're trying to sell them. And so that's different, right? That immediately puts you in the realm of market development, rather than selling. And so one of the biggest failure modes is you hand your solution to your sales force, and maybe you give them a couple hours of training and you say, let's go get this done, right? And this is exciting. Look at the new thing that we're going to sell. And then they get out there and they're like, this is really hard to sell. The guy I'm
Right.
talking to doesn't seem interested in it.
Yeah.
Maybe he thinks I should give it to him for free. And I'm just not going to spend any more time selling this, because the more time I spend selling this, I look like an idiot, and I'm not selling the thing that I get paid,
Yeah. Yeah.
commission to
Yeah.
sell. So
Yeah.
your own sales force will like betray you if you put them in that position. So you've really got to rethink from the get-go, what's the universe of stakeholders who care about this? and will influence this decision. How do I get access to them? And when I get there, what's going to be the burden of proof? Because now I'm selling value. I'm not selling something that I can show some technical performance data on, and they'll go, okay, that's great. That
Right.
many,
Right.
pounds per square inch. Good. That's what we need. It's going to be, you can actually drive, X percent of, cost out of our manufacturing of this device by using this solution. And you haven't done it yet.
Right.
So how do you sell that, and how do you price for that and package that are really big questions, and force you ultimately to understand those jobs and that universe of influencers, and then work backward from that to design your selling motion. So that's what I call it anyway. What do you have to do? Who needs to be in the room? What are the messages? And then to design your sales force to be able to do that. So it's a big thought process, often not considered deeply enough, and a big source of false negatives. A brilliant solution that can't be sold is no longer a brilliant solution. So,
Right. And your sense is that you can build this capability at scale, right? I mean, similar a little bit to the product solution pathway distinction that we talked about. It can absolutely be as rigorous, and there can be a playbook, for how you sell these things. It's just a different playbook.
Yeah. I mean, the playbook is actually hugely important if you've got, people who grew up in an environment of a different type of selling.
Right.
And so the playbook is a huge, I think, enabler of
Right.
anybody who's trying to do this at scale. I would say, by the way, you shouldn't immediately try to do it at scale.
Yeah.
There's a learning by doing aspect of this, because another big mistake is build out at scale. We cracked it. We know what we need. Now we're going to go hire 50 new senior account executives who are going to go hit the executives we need to do the value selling. And then you realize, well, it might take, the selling cycle's long for these.
Yeah.
And pretty soon somebody comes around looking for cost takeouts, and all the sales guys who aren't selling get taken out. So you got to be careful about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like there's a lot of nuance to that, kind of ramp up, to your point on, going from 0 to 1 and being able to have a couple proof points to demonstrate, value, and having the right, sort of early partners to be able to do that with. You've got to sort of build those sort of foundational, pieces before you're really ready to, hit the inflection point and pour, gas on the approach.
Absolutely.
One thing a quick question. I'm curious how you think about it, Rob. The balance between transforming your existing sales organization to do this through training and playbook versus, injecting, kind of new talent, and, people with, sort of experience from this type of selling process, bringing them into the organization. Is this a skill that you can sort of learn and build, or is it accelerated by bringing in some outside, folks with the right experience?
I think typically you need at least some injection of that.
Mm.
It can be very hard to teach old dogs new tricks. You may have people in your organization who are going to be good at it, but you didn't select for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's typically important to find some new people who are built that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay, why don't we spend a few minutes going deep on the last one, which I think you rightly said was probably one of the most tricky ones. I don't think when people sell a product, there still is relationship after it, warranty, and all that sort of good stuff. But with a solution, that relationship endures in a much more substantive way than I think it does for a product. So maybe unpack that for us. What's going on here? Why have you found that this is such a challenge for organizations?
Yeah, and I'm gonna reference a conversation this morning. Had breakfast with a CEO of CEO of a company that offers I'm just going to call it a digital solution, but it's a very impressively differentiated technology with a really compelling value proposition for customers. But the challenge is that there are big change management implications around it, in order for the customers to realize that value.
Mm.
And it's a significant barrier in terms of being able to scale the sale of that technology. And
Yeah.
so he's recognized that around that, he needs to build a really significant set of capabilities to enable the customer to strategically understand the value of what they're creating, and then to change the processes and jobs around the technology to enable them to realize, its value. And that's not even accounting for the bit that's about like connecting the digital plumbing together to make sure that
Yeah.
it's all accessing the right data and all of that. So, this can be a really significant journey. And, you've got to be there with your customer, to take them on it. And it's also not a static environment. It's constantly changing. And what is frequently the case is that elements of a solution that are, delivered through a kind of a service model over time become automated, and competitors emerge who can, do the things that you're doing. And you have to be constantly able to not only to problem solve at the customer, but also to expand the reach and impact of your solution
Yeah.
in order to stay relevant. So you're ultimately building a portfolio of solutions if you're really moving into this business. And if I go back to the deer example, that's what they did. They started with really basic stuff like, we can access the data and we can help you make sure your tractors are properly maintained, and we can help you know where everything is. And then they started moving into the realm of, we're going to help you make your field more productive.
Yeah.
And that was a huge expansion of value potential.
Yeah.
And then that required them to take down a whole bunch of other barriers, connect in a whole bunch of other things. So it's an expansive concept and requires that hands-on management.
Yeah, one of the things I've found here is that it can be sometimes, challenging, particularly for legacy product, or organizations where, the mindset is a little bit, there's this big sort of development process, and then, we've got this thing built, and it's sort of fixed in time, and we sort of lock it down, and then we're just, kind of out selling it. But for solutions, there's sort of, yes, there's aspects of that, but there's also aspects of it that are evergreen, and that there's a faster cycle of innovation, on top of that. I've seen that, quite a bit recently in the automotive industry, where, the update cycle on a car on the physical points is, has one sort of cadence to it, but then the software and other things can have a very different, cadence on top of it. And getting an organization to move at two different, speeds, can be a process change and a culture change, in a pretty significant way.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe one last question, or topic on this. So value management. Where do you see that sitting? I think in the other ones, we've talked about, there's natural sort of, product development or sales organization that you're trying to transform. Value capture and realization and solution, oftentimes doesn't have a natural, home. So where have you seen, companies try to, radically adapt, a service organization or something to take on some of this responsibility, versus needing to create an entirely new sort of organizational construct to, support the entire life cycle of these things once they're sold in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can vary depending on the extent to which the solution extends beyond the collective experience of the organization that maybe provides some kind of service today.
Hmm.
But I have a bias here that you actually need to create a new capability here. There's a cluster of jobs to be done that most organizations don't spend much time thinking about. And in order to have a successful, sustainably growing and profitable solutions business, you need to create this function. This often, results in the solutions business having a separate home from the product business, and protected in some ways from the product business because its operating norms need to be so distinct from those
Yeah.
of the product business.
Yeah. 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 That's great. So, Rob, I'm curious your sort of closing thoughts, guidance to, I'm guessing a lot of the folks who've joined, coming from companies who are wrestling with this. What's your, for people who are seeing this need in the market or seeing this opportunity, yeah, how do you get started? How do you get, kind of a leadership team sort of, if you took us, 2 decades back to kind of where Deere was, how do you get them aligned on the scope and scale, and the opportunity here to, these are changes that are going to take, place over many years, but how do you get started?
Yeah, well, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think that the success factors for them were this conviction.
Hmm.
And, in their case, it was pretty cool. They'd done an analysis and they could see that the value capture for the equipment sector within agriculture overall was being compacted, and that there was this potential associated with the development of new seeds that was unexploited. It was a latent value potential in the market, but was going to require information-enabled ag. So they were like, how do we participate? We must participate, or
Yeah.
we're in a dinosaur
Yeah.
mode here.
Right.
And so that was conviction for them. Conviction could represent a lot of different things for different leadership teams, but they need conviction because they will lose will if they don't have conviction, because it's hard.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is to realistically understand how different this is at a profound level, at a business operating model level, because the other temptation is to do it on the cheap, and do it changing as little as possible. Right. That's
Mm.
every industrial company's
Yeah.
instinct is no, we're not going to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so along with conviction then creates room to have a realistic conversation about the level of challenge associated, and then you can begin to open it up like we have here today. And we just scratched the surface, right? We
Yeah.
barely touched this. There's a lot to it. It's a fascinating topic. But anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Okay. Well, happy to pause, there. I know we're sort of coming up on time. We'll stick on here a minute in case there's, questions. Again, feel free to stick them in the, Q&A in the chat, or if there's anything that we've talked about or haven't talked about that you're curious about, Rob and I are happy to take questions at this point. Okay. I see one question here about what persona are you talking to, and I don't know, Ron, if you can say a little bit more about that, but I'm guessing that's about what's the buyer persona in the company. I'm curious, Rob, have you seen certain organizational roles within customers who are the target for these sort of solutions? Are they kind of at sort of a overall brand level, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the nature of the
Yeah.
solution and what parts of the organization it affects, but it's typically somebody with a pretty broad responsibility.
Right. Right.
So if this is on this call, what persona are we talking to? Yeah, I think we're talking to in our mind, we're talking to people who may be confronting the challenge of trying to develop a solution inside an industrial corporation, and who are trying to navigate some of the complexities of that.
Yeah.
We don't have a double-click playbook article other than the one that we've that this webinar was built on, but we're certainly thinking about going deeper on all these topics. And agree, Ron, it could touch on people across the organization, and it typically does, like
Right. Yeah.
internally, right? So absolutely. You've got to get up to general management, right? Like you need a business unit leader focused on this, right? You're not gonna create a solution and successfully, get it launched and implemented in the marketplace coming just from, for example, a product development function, or a product management function or something like that.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, happy to pause it here. Really appreciate, everybody, joining and indulging, Rob and I and listening to us for a bit here. Great questions. Hope you found it helpful. I think there was the article in the chat that, goes a little bit, deeper on these topics. And as always with these, if there's additional, questions or you want to kick around some ideas, Rob and I are, available. And I think you know how to, get hold of us. We're always happy to chat and exchange thoughts on this topic. So thank you
Absolutely.
again, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.